Hello and welcome back to the Simplifiers podcast, where we take topics either in business or in life and simplify them. And that is it, my friends. We love talking to super smart people all over the world. And my guest for today is one of those people that I cannot wait to introduce to you. I would like for you to meet Melissa Monte. She is the host of the heartfelt podcast, Mind Love. Now, through raw stories, personal experience, and inspiring interviews, Mind Love highlights the incredible role of the mind in happiness, health, and success. As an entrepreneur, yogi, and former corporate VP, plus a self-proclaimed seeker, Melissa has spent the last 16 years exploring methods of improving the human condition and learning what makes us humans tick. I'd like to welcome to the Simplifiers podcast today, Melissa Monte. Hi, Melissa.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Oh, Melissa, we have so much to talk about, girl.
Story of my life.
Yes. I'm not super old. I just turned 40. But, in 40 years of living this life on planet Earth, there are certainly some things that I'm starting to catch on with only really in the last couple of years. And it's realizing how gosh darn important the brain is in every aspect of my life. So the things that I'd like for you to simplify today, would you just kind of, tick the box and make it happen, is helping us really understand how to wrangle our mindset. And let's talk about how we can set habits and routines that truly set us up for our best life. Can you help us with that? Please, pretty please.
Of course I can.
But before we dive into that, Melissa, tell us a little bit about your backstory. I mean, if somebody's never heard of you or Mind Love, your podcast, which, by the way, is incredible, tell us a little bit about how you got here.
Well, I grew up with a pretty charmed life. I was a student. I had a great family. And then when I was a teenager, a series of traumas hit back to back. And I just felt ill-equipped to deal with any of that stuff. Yeah. And so I had read some books before. Thankfully, my mom was in a book club. So I got a little bit of an intro into the habits of highly successful people and things like that. But I was also very young. I was reading that when I was like 11 years old.
Wow.
So I did not understand it, and I mostly just kind of pushed it to the side, but I had these little seedlings like remain positive and things like that. So when my traumas hit, my way of dealing with it was just to remain positive. But what that ended up doing for me was I ignored a lot of my feelings, and I just kind of pushed them away. And instead of just crying all the time, it was manifesting in my body in different ways and in my brain. And so I would have these crying spells sometimes, and I developed a really bad eating disorder for years. And so I found myself being these series of little bad habits that were happening all the time. Yeah. And from the outside, a lot of people didn't see what was going on because I was able to still be high performing, got good jobs, but on the inside, I was pretty much a mess. So I started to figure out how to dig my way out of that. Because of the seedlings that I had through those books, I knew that there was help out there. I knew there were ways to look at it. I just needed to find it. So I read hundreds of books, from Think and Grow Rich to spiritual books and entrepreneur books and just different ways to look at the world or my problems. And I started to find the common denominators between a bunch of different things. Spirituality, business, all of them at the end of the day start to say the same basic things that I started to apply to my life, and I slowly started to dig my way out. And so through that, I did a lot of work on finding my purpose. Because I was interested in so many things, I ended up going down the rabbit hole with a lot of things. Maybe this is what I'm supposed to do. Maybe this is what I'm supposed to do. But it wasn't until I really did the work to figure out my own personal superpowers and what people saw in me that I had this aha moment of bringing all of this information together and sharing it with the world through my podcast.
Yeah. And, I think it's interesting when I speak to other people like yourself who really understand how important mindset is in having a thriving life, It's almost as if there is like, before you realize this, you're sort of in the bubble, right? You're in this bubble and it's a bit of a fog and you just kind of plug away at life and you do your thing and you watch your reality TV shows at night and you eat your junk food and you sort of sit in your routine and you sort of play like life a bit safe as well. But then once you start to read a book or listen to a podcast or go, hey, actually, things can be different. Things can be way better. And you have the ability to change your outlook. It's like somebody pulls the veil back and goes, pop to the bubble and go, oh. Do you know what I mean? Like, did you have a moment like that for yourself? I mean, you said that you had some traumas that you had in your childhood. Was there a moment like that for you?
Since I didn't deal with a lot of those traumas until I was older, it wasn't like one of those in general pushed me to that. It was little aha moments for me.
Yeah.
But suddenly I realized there's a reason that people call it waking up or being awake to certain things. And one of my favorite sayings is that you can't read the label from inside the bottle. Mm-hmm. So I agree with everything that you just said. And at the end of the day, looking back on all my problems, I could just see where they had originated. And I think one of the biggest things, though, that began to help me was to not think of my traumas as personally me. When I started to realize how the brain worked, how my energy frequencies worked, that basically we are these series of chemical reactions and habit loops, and your brain works in a specific way, and your actions leading up to those or things that happen around you leading up to this moment all create this person that's called the ego that we become so attached to. So if I'm trying to do something and suddenly I'm like, oh, well, I can't get out of this bout of depression, or why can't I stop binging and purging my food?
Yeah.
And I would just feel like a failure.
Yeah.
And so when I started to realize, wait, this is a system that I can hack, that I can figure out how to disrupt, that I can reroute, then things started to really change for me, because I realized, me personally, I am that highest version of myself. That's who I am. I may not be there yet, and I might be failing in all these other ways, but that's because I haven't perfected the system, or I haven't made those small changes. And to realize that everything is so changeable, and that I don't have these innate flaws, was a big game changer for me.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, one of my mentors, Marie Forleo, she says everything is figure-outable, right? And when you realize that, I think some of the times when I have been stuck in life or been hit by depression or anxiety levels are high, well, for me personally, and I'm curious if it's the same for you, it's when you get into that loop of spiraling thoughts where you're like, there's no hope. There is no way I can get myself out of this. This is so far down. There's just no way. Do you think that there is something to that?
Definitely. And I've been there before. When you're down there, it's hard to see the glimmer of light because you're so deep into the tunnel. Yeah. But if you start to walk and you start to make your way towards the entrance and you see a little glimmer, then suddenly it's easier to run, because otherwise you're like, how long am I walking? So for me, a big step to take is getting out of my left brain and into my right, and stop thinking about it so much and start doing these little things.
Yeah.
When you start to become in tune with your own energy and what brings you energy or drains your energy, then it starts to be easier to do. It starts to be almost a fun game of figuring out who you are and what brings you joy.
Yeah.
And so instead of sitting there and feeling the whole thing, do something, even if it seems like a really hard step to take, because once you do that, you're going to raise your frequency just a little bit. You're going to be just a little bit stronger. Then you're going to have the strength to do one more thing. And before you know it, it doesn't seem like it's so hopeless anymore. You can see that glimmer of light.
Yeah, yeah. So let's talk about that, because I think, exactly that. When you take a teeny tiny baby step towards something different, then it does open up something in your brain that goes, oh, actually, there's possibility here, right? Like, there is something maybe I could do. I do have a bit of control. Because I think that's also the other factor to it, right? Is lack of hope, but then also feeling And maybe it's a martyrdom thing, maybe not. Maybe it's just a victim thing, maybe not. But just feeling like you don't have control over the situation. Do you think that that's part of it as well?
Yeah, it definitely is part of it. But again, I think really figuring out that, like, think of it like a game. How do you give this character more energy? How do you fight this? How do you get away from this? The more I look at it at an objective point of view, the more strength I feel like I have.
Totally.
So, one thing I'm really playing with now, because I do feel like I'm at a stronger point in my life where I am more aware of these things, and I'm becoming more and more in control over how to steer my day in the direction that I want it to go to.
Yeah.
And so a lot of those things are trying to take the emotion out of all of my decisions, because if you, for example, wait until the morning to decide what you're going to do, then you're deciding when you're kind of tired, when you have a feeling of unknown because you don't have the day planned out. And so that feeling of unknown is basically you have all these decisions to make. And that there's resistance there for most people. So one simple thing I do is try to plan my day the night before. And then in the morning, part of my morning routine is just to write what I'm grateful for while I sip my matcha latte. And so then all of a sudden I'm excited to get out of bed, and all I have to focus on are the best things in that moment.
Yeah.
And my whole day is planned out. And so suddenly I know the action to take, and there's no more emotion there. And so the more you can get out of all of those feelings that are overwhelming you and start to just do and just be, I think it can be really helpful for most people.
Well, and you're acting in a proactive space rather than a reactive space, right? So, the trap of checking your phone the first thing in the morning, like we all do it, right? We're so guilty of it. But when I do that, first thing in the morning, the alarm goes off and I look straight at my phone and my email, you're being reactive. You're letting your inbox control you and your emotions while you're still groggy and waking up. And it's like, oh God, somebody's emailed me that they need this thing now, blah, 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 blah. And it's not the best life, right? It can be, there's a better way. Bottom line, there's a better way. I want to back up to something you said a little bit earlier. And because I'm all about simplifying things, I think a lot of times you hear the term, how to be at a higher vibration or energy frequencies or things like that. Can you just break that down for us? Tell us what is energy frequencies and higher vibration in life? What does that mean to you?
Yeah, well, basically, we are all made up of energy. And when you take something down to the microscopic level, you realize it's not just this physical form, it's a wave, it's a vibration. So that's another thing that I keep in mind with a lot of the things that I do, because we're all a series of these chemical reactions, and so it's our job to kind of steer them.
Yeah. Yeah. And so being in a higher vibration
role in
state.
the creation of our physical reality. Yeah, because basically these vibrational frequencies allow energy to express itself. So we're all vibrating at certain frequencies, and you can feel when you are in a room with somebody who's draining your energy. You can feel when you're doing something that's draining your energy. It's probably a really big sign that those aren't your people. That's not what you're supposed to be doing. And I'm not saying that you only are doing things your whole life that are raising your vibration, because we all have jobs to do. We all have dishes, families, clothes to fold. So it's balancing that and figuring out how to remain a little bit higher for most of the time.
Girl,
so
if I could outsource laundry, I totally would. Like, I would delegate that today.
Yeah, I think you can here in
Los
Angeles.
Yes.
They just pick it up.
Right,
There's even an app for it. Yeah, and so when you start to play with your energy frequencies, it's being aware of your feelings when you're doing something, when you're around people, when you're choosing your life. So recently, before I started my podcast, I wrote down a list of basically what I want my perfect day to look like.
Yes.
When 5 years from now, when I'm that awesome CEO and I have my perfect life and my bank account isn't a question. What does my day look like? And which things am I currently doing that drain my energy that I could maybe outsource? So that comes on the business side of it. But on the personal side, it's who am I hanging out with? And should that be changed? I've unfortunately, but fortunately, cut out a lot of people in my life recently because of that. And when you start to hone your vibration, things start to happen for you. Really, things start to act in synchronicity. It almost feels like things are flowing towards you. And there have been a lot of accounts of this. So I used to hear it and be like, oh, that's so woo-woo. Like, oh yeah, raise my vibes or whatever. But it makes a really, really big difference in how people perceive you and what energy you're bringing into the world. And so I think it's our purpose to find the value that we can bring. And you're going to give your highest value with those things that you're already innately good at that make you smile, bring you joy when you're doing. And so a lot of it is this choice. But I think the first step with all of it, no matter where you're starting, even if you are surrounded by people at your job that drain your energy, you don't like your job, the first step is setting an intention that you want to start to raise it. That alone can shift your perspective on things. And it's a commitment that you're just going to show up with a positive outlook. You're going to focus on the things you're grateful for instead of everything that's bringing you down in that moment. And you'll start to see these little shifts. Then those bigger decisions will start to be easier to make. And if you live your life that way, you'll find yourself in a place where you're happy, you're healthier, and your life just seems to flow.
Yeah, I've seen it 100% on my side. And, one thing that's very powerful for me is, again, it comes back down to simplifying is, I am a multi-passionate kind of person as well. And I'm an ideas person. So if I had 80 hours in a day, I would do 5 different businesses. I would just do it all, do all the things, right? But the reality is I am so much more effective when I can simplify down. So I choose one major business goal per quarter, one, and that's it. So the team all knows we're all moving the ship towards this one thing. Now there may be hundreds of little decisions and things and planting seeds that are going to grow for 2 more quarters down the line, which is, necessary. But when your primary focus on one thing and you see it, like I have it written on my laptop screen and, I see it every single day, helps you laser focus in. What kind of things do you do to help you really, really stay on track with when you set your intention?
I have a pretty great routine that I feel like has really changed my life. And that sounds like an overstatement, but like I said, I found myself in a series of habit loops. One of my biggest limiting beliefs was that I thought I was going to be too ADD to complete anything like my dad. One of those traumas was my dad passing, and he was always into the next thing, but he'd move on so quickly. And that's how people saw him. And there was so much of myself that people see that were just like my dad. And so I didn't realize how much that was holding me back.
Yeah.
So I started to basically plan out how I was going to change that and use all these little tricks that I learned. So my biggest things are starting the day with my gratitude journal. And one of my favorite tools that can help with every single thing I'm about to tell you is my favorite journal called the Self Journal. And so every day you get a whole 2 pages and there's morning gratitude and evening gratitude. And so in the morning, I write what I'm thankful for, and I review the day that I had planned out the night before. When the nighttime comes, I plan my next day, and this includes the 3 goals that are going to move me forward to my bigger goal.
Yes.
There's a space to rewrite that one goal that you were talking about. So I have one goal for every quarter as well, one main goal, and I rewrite it every single day to keep it in the forefront of my mind. There's been studies on how powerful it is to actually write something with your hand. And so focusing on my goal, I know the 3 biggest things that I need to accomplish, and then laid out by time are the blocks that I'm doing each of these things. So of course, if I finish those 3 things, I can always add more, but After those 3 main goals, my day is considered a success. Then you write your wins for the day and any lessons that you learned.
Yeah.
Focusing on your wins is such an important thing because we all have these endless lists of to-dos, and we can check off 17 things in a day, but there's still 50 more and we feel like a failure. And so to know that only 3 of these are what is going to make you feel like a success at the end of the day can have a huge shift on how you go into the next day, and it builds positive momentum.
100%.
Because I don't think people realize how often they've got these big goals and they might be super productive for a few days in a row, then they burn out and then they make no progress because everything is so much unknown. There's so many emotions involved in their next decisions. So the more that you can break these down, whatever it is in life, and just have it there, so you are choosing from a list. So if I'm having a low energy day, I can pick some of the more mundane tasks, but that way I'm still moving forward. After 3 months, you'll be so surprised at what you accomplish just by sticking to a simple framework like that.
Yeah.
And then I end my day with more gratitude. And I've just recently added a visualization habit. Right before I go to bed, those 5 minutes before I go to bed, I close my eyes and I try to feel the feelings of already accomplishing my goal. So taking myself to 15 minutes after that, knowing I have a certain amount of money in my bank account and trying to feel it. Because the more you can feel that, then you're going to go to bed and your brain is going to go to work for you to try to make these little connections and bring you a little bit closer to that person. So
it's so true.
It's
so great, and I appreciate you sharing that with us, because I think the tip on the top of doing that evening time visualization, feeling it with all 5 senses, and then coasting your brain into dreamland. And dreamland, that's where all the fun stuff happens. Your brain is like processing the day, processing the things that you saw, or you may not even be aware that you saw, and it's doing the work, while you're asleep. So yes, you are asleep, but I think your brain is still kind of putting the pieces together and putting that puzzle piece. So I love that, having an evening visualization. And yes, I think there is absolute power in writing your goal every single day and writing it in a way that says, I have already completed this. Like you're retraining that brain to realize, like, yes, this is possible. Even if it's a crazy big goal, right? Even if it looks nothing like your current reality, you have to do those steps, right? To get yourself from point A to point B, right?
Yes, definitely. I use my visualization to bring myself further than those 3-month goals. Those 3-month goals are these little stepping stones to get me to this higher place. But I like to picture myself on the stage giving a TED Talk, knowing that my bank account has millions of dollars in it, knowing that I'm helping hundreds of thousands of people. That's what I really try to feel. And then these goals with deadlines are ways to move myself towards that. But I do try to let go of the exact when and how of that big audacious goal, because somebody once said that if what we could know about the brain was 1 mile, we've only walked 3 feet. They're discovering so much more. It's like this complex land in there, and we barely understand what goes on. Like, why do we only use a small percentage of our brain? Things like that. There's a book that's one of my favorites called Psycho-Cybernetics that calls it the automatic success mechanism, but it's really the reticular activating system. And that's the part of your brain that goes to work for you when you're not even conscious of it, which is why it's so important to have these bigger visualizations. And then when you go to sleep, sleep is all these thoughts, all of the things that you're pulling in from the universe, things you've seen, things you've heard, and creative inspiration is also coming from some unknown place sometimes. I really believe that we're kind of pulling from a collective conscious. And so when we go to bed, these little things that we don't yet understand about the brain are making connections. They're making it easier for you to highlight opportunities that might bring there instead of focusing on these negative things that are bringing you down, which is what a lot of people are doing. They're focusing on the negative things that they feel. And so they're bringing in more of that. That's what their brain is looking to pull in. The opportunities that they're looking for are more negative opportunities because they can't get themselves out of those habits of thought. So I think it's really important, if you could do one thing, is to set an intention to be your best self, your highest self, and to try to focus on just the good things in your life. And as simple as that sounds, a lot of things are going on behind the scenes that you may not understand, but when you start to see it, it's addicting.
100%. And, the truth is you have to disrupt like what your brain is focusing on. Bottom line, like what you just said there is like when you're in the muck or, your house just flooded and you've got mold to deal with and you're like, oh my God, how am I going to get out of this? Yes, we've all been there where it's like, holy crap, this is seeming like it's just surmounting. But really, truly, what gets you out is not focusing on the muck, but focusing on the next step, right? It's focusing on that higher vibration and that the next step. And, what I think is interesting to me is, regardless of what your spiritual beliefs are, I feel like the universe, God, source, whatever you want to call it, they're like wanting to nudge you and like whisper in your ear every now and again. And so I get the whispers in the shower. That sounds weird, but I do. I get
Sounds fun.
I know. I get the whispers in the shower and it's like, hey, Mary, call that person. Ask them about this. Or, hey, Mary, go pick up that book because you heard about it. This is the third person that's told you about the book. You got to go read the book. Do you get the whispers that just say, hey, Melissa, what about this?
Yes, I definitely do. And the more I'm becoming in touch with my energies and that side, the more often I can feel it. In the world we live in right now, with all the technology, the notifications popping up from even my watch now,
yes.
It can be very overwhelming.
Yeah.
And I think in a lot of the ways we're disconnecting ourselves from source or whatever you believe that it is. We're losing our ability to think of something off the top of our head because we can Google it instead.
Yeah.
Which is why it's so important to get out into nature or to spend the time with yourself. Just sit with yourself to feel what you feel, to feel what you feel around other people. Try to take moments like that as often as possible, whether you're doing something, whether you're with people. I try to stop as often as I think about it. At any given moment, we can stop and realize what our brain's thinking of.
Yeah.
It's so rare, unless you're like a guru of some sort, to be like, oh, I haven't been thinking of anything for the last few minutes. That really doesn't happen with people.
Yeah.
So when I'm driving and I'm like, oh, wow, I'm deep in thought about something that's either already happened or is about to happen. In psychocybernetics, they say that we spend an average of 3 hours replaying things that have already happened, regardless of how long they take. And so realizing that and stopping that, just stopping it short and going into a moment of mindfulness. For a lot of people, they think you've got to stop thinking completely, but that's not what it is. It's just redirecting. So instead of replaying that argument I got in with somebody or the way somebody said something to me or all this stuff that I have to do later and not knowing how it's going to get done, I'll just stop and try to think of something I'm grateful for, or stop and just take a few deep breaths in.
Yeah, and
or
close
think
the
of a
loop.
word.
Yeah, close the loop.
It's helpful for me to think of the word thinking because something about that objectifies it for me. And then suddenly I realize, wait, these thoughts aren't me. These thoughts are happening. Disrupt. Here's my higher self. You're just thinking. And something about that just kind of releases it for me. But the more that you do that, then the less likely you're going to be overtaken by all of these loops, all of the feelings that come with everything that you're thinking about. And you'll just be able to stop and be a little bit more mindful about the direction that you're headed in.
Well, I wanted to highlight something you said there, very small, but I think it's really important, is that these things are not me. These feelings, these thoughts, these emotions, they're not you, right?
That can be really hard to grapple with for most people because what feels more personal than your own emotion?
Yeah.
Nothing really. Because even if somebody else says something and you take it personally, that's you taking it personally. That's you attaching these thoughts, those external things. And since thoughts are internal, it feels like it's just inside you. This is what's driving me. This is who I am. I'm a very emotional person. You should never attach anything less than your highest self to the words I am.
Yeah.
the more you do that, you're calling out these negative aspects of yourself. You're creating this ego form and really believing that these lower parts of yourself are you. That shouldn't be it. Those are the things that are they're just what you've taken up as patterns. They're totally changeable.
Yes.
So it's really important and how you attach your words, because your words are a powerful thing. And if I only say words like I am powerful, I am strong, I can do anything, these have a really powerful effect on the way you view yourself and then the way you view the world.
Yeah, 100%. And it breaks my heart when I hear friends or even my daughter's friends, at a very young age say, oh, I'm clumsy, or I'm not very good at that, or, I'm not very creative, or, friends that are older and say, oh, I don't think I could ever run a business on my own, and I always challenge it. I go, well, wait, why do you say that? Why is that? Is that really true? Because I think sometimes we get stuck in those limiting beliefs and believe, well, that's just me. I'm not a creative. I can't do this, right? Or, oh, I'm not good with numbers, and I always say that that's not always the case. Everything can change, right? It's not necessarily this is the thing and that's your identity for all times from here forward, right?
Yeah. I used to claim that I was really indecisive. Indecisive is actually a form of pain because it's this unrest in your brain. It's not something you want to claim for yourself.
Yeah.
And so many people do it. But I did an exercise and I heard it from two different places. And just like you were saying, suddenly, okay, there's a reason that this needs to be done.
Yeah.
And it was to carry around a notebook for the whole day. And whenever a limiting belief comes up, write it down. I had written down the ones I already knew about myself. But when you're prepared to notice and record your limiting beliefs, things will come up that you didn't even realize were there.
Yeah.
That's actually how I realized my biggest limiting belief was being too ADD to complete something.
Yeah.
So I wrote all of these down and then I crossed them out and wrote something empowering.
Yeah.
Sounds so cheesy. It's it's one of those things that I had heard before and I was like, okay, I'll do this mentally. I don't really need to carry around the notebook.
No, you need to do the thing. You need to do it, right?
A lot of people, and myself included, fall into the trap that just because they learn it, they've done the work. That's not how it works at all. And this was my year of change. And so I wrote down the limiting beliefs. I crossed them out. And it was like this gate opened up. Suddenly, those things were not affecting me anymore. I can't explain it fully. But after I did that, that's when I launched my podcast. That's when I started to complete all these goals. People started to say how big of a change they noticed in me.
Yeah.
It felt like a miracle. It was such a simple thing, but suddenly those things weren't imprisoning me anymore. It was like I saw them for what they were and I could move on.
Well, and I think what it is like what we were talking about at the beginning of the episode. It's just a teeniest little bit glimmer of hope. And that's all it sometimes needs. And I think sometimes, I'll just speak for myself, sometimes when I think, oh, that is so insurmountable, like there is no way that there's some one simple thing that can fix that bit. No, actually, maybe it is. Like maybe there is one simple thing, writing in a notebook every single time you say a limiting belief, just writing it down. Another thing I like to do when I write those things down, or we do a review every quarter of, what worked, what didn't work, and lessons learned. And when I write the what didn't work or what were our biggest blunders or mishaps, after we do that, I tell my team, and I do it myself. I say, okay, now we've done that, right? Write ha 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 ha, all in big bold letters, like get a Sharpie marker out and just like laugh it off, because it's like that is not you. It doesn't define you. It's not who you are, right? And then we make a game of it. We crumple it up in a big ball and we throw it into the trash bin, and who can get it in the trash bin the first and make a basket, right? Like, because it's a matter of doing these very simple rituals, if you will, that kind of takes the power out of it, because we don't realize it's like holding us down of like, oh, I feel so ashamed that I didn't do bleh, or I felt like I'm not enough doing bleh, and it's all these things that we say to ourselves that hold us back, right?
I love that, because what all that's doing is it's giving a physical representation with what you should be doing in your mind. There's in a lot of movies you see, these transformational retreats. It's a lot of like hippies, and they're like, now burn the paper, burn your limiting belief, and you think it's cheesy, but there's power in doing these things.
It works.
Because your mind just attaches this form of releasing it or seeing it as an external thing that you can let go of. And those have more powerful effects than you think of. So I am all into those, those cheesy little representations.
Yeah. So tell me about what a power list is, because I know you are known for these things. And how does it work simply?
Well, we've talked a lot about it, but it's basically removing the emotion from as many things as possible so that you can get into those do modes instead of overthinking everything. I like to keep lists for as many things as I can think of. And it doesn't mean that I have to stick to them like a robot, but basically I know what my limiting beliefs are that are crossed out and more powerful. I know what I'm grateful for. I keep those are ongoing lists.
Yeah.
But more importantly, I have a self-care list, the things that will raise my energy when I'm down.
Love it.
When you're at a low point and somebody says, do something to cheer you up, half the time I want to snap back and be like, no, I'm going to binge watch Netflix and drink a bottle of wine.
Right.
But if I can just go to this list and it's a long list, so I can pick one that fits the mood. It can be going on a walk. It can be writing in a journal. It can be drawing. These are the things that you have to play with for yourself and figure out what brings you joy. But I have a list for a lot of different areas of my life that I want to go to without that emotional part. The more that you do that, the more you find yourself in series of actions, the more you feel like you build momentum with life, and the more you feel in control, I really believe, because you start to realize the power you have to flip your mood, or the power you have to get in a more productive zone, or the power you have to make yourself feel more creative.
Yeah.
So I have a powerless booklet of there's almost 20 different lists that you can write that you can then go to when you're feeling low, or when you're feeling like you just can't get work done, or whatever it is. And it starts to help you just pluck from the list and do.
Well, and
a lot of people have. I adopted this from a bunch of different sources. There have been guests on my podcast that have talked about the power of a self-care list. There have been countless books that talk about gratitude lists, or basically planning out your day. So one of these lists is just a daily planner that you can use to list out your day. But there's power in lists, which is why I call them the power lists. And like I said, a lot of people have found just a lot of success with getting out of the one area of their brain and going to the other.
And I think that's it. You hit on it earlier, is sometimes when you're in a slump, you lose that ability to think creatively and figure out ways to pull yourself out. So it's like creating that list of self-care or rewards or whatever that is. You've done that when you're in high vibe Melissa, right? Not low vibe Melissa. So high vibe Melissa's like, yeah, heck yeah, I love a bubble bath, and I like going to do this, and I love just 2 minutes of breathing, and I really love oil painting or whatever it is, right? So that you're just giving that love to low vibe Melissa when she's down in the dumps. And so she, like, low vibe Melissa doesn't know what to do. She goes to the list. It makes it as simple and easy as possible. So Melissa has gifted us these free downloadable printable power lists. And so you can download those at mindlove.com/the Simplifiers. And that link is down below in the show notes as well for everybody. So hopefully that will help you again when you're feeling low vibes and you're in the muck. This is certainly going to help pull you out of it. I asked the next few questions to all of our guests, and thank you so much for all the very simple, practical tips that you've given us so far to help us set better habits and routines. So thank you, Melissa, for all of that. But a couple of questions before we wrap up. First and foremost, what's one book or maybe a blog that you're reading right now that is super inspiring you or either challenging you right now?
My most recent favorite book is Psycho-Cybernetics.
Mm-hmm.
It's good for people with a spiritual side or non-spiritual side, which is what I love because it kind of brings some of the science into these spiritual ideas, which I need for myself to wrap my head around anything. And it's why I've adopted so much spirituality into my life, is because I've started to see the science behind it.
Yeah.
But Psycho-Cybernetics is actually the original self-help book. It's all about the power of the mind and how the mind works for us. We basically plant these little seeds and then it goes to work. It's what they give top performing Olympians on visualizing their wins. It is such a powerful book. So I highly recommend that anybody who wants to learn how to use their brain systems optimally, or how to create a better self-image that then starts to happen in physical form, that's the book I'd like to direct them to.
Yeah, I mean, it really does come down to brain training and that like cultivating that champion's mindset. That's great. We'll definitely put the link down below for that book as well. Is there any good apps that maybe you're using or tools that are helping you simplify your life right now? Maybe just one?
One app that I think is really powerful is called Think Up. And what it allows you to do is record affirmations in your own voice and then set a background music to it.
Ooh.
So it's really awesome. You can even tag each affirmation. So say I have a bunch of affirmations focused on wealth or self-esteem, and just loop those with a really great background sound. And I actually created a really awesome affirmation meditation set to the miracle tone of the solfeggio scale. This is another thing that has to do with frequencies, but this miracle tone is supposed to be a tone that helps you to attract love and abundance into your life. So I created this 30-minute affirmation meditation that I'll also have at the link with the power list for your listeners.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that. So Melissa, tell us maybe one person in your circle of friends or your network through the podcast or beyond, one person you think we should interview that's super, super smart on the Simplifiers podcast, and why?
There's a woman named Sheryl Hunter who talks a lot about resilience. She was abducted in France when she was trying to be a model. It was her first trip ever. She grew up in a rural town, went to France, and somebody told her they could make her a model. A friend said, heck no, and she snuck off to fulfill her dream and ended up being abducted for 3 days. Everything imaginable happened to her. They even cut her hair and then they left her for dead. And instead of letting that destroy her, she basically has transformed it into a way of helping other people find resilience and get back on their feet. But it's whether you've gone through something big or small, her story and her way of telling it is very powerful.
Yeah. And, just to say, your podcast is so inspiring because you interview some incredible people around the world and uncovering their stories of how they've gone through trauma and strife and things like this, and, how that's transformed their lives. So if you haven't tuned into the Mind Love podcast, I highly recommend it, but you might need some Kleenex because some of the stories they truly are heartbreaking, but really inspiring. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah. And these are stories that need to be heard because I think sometimes in social media, sometimes in what we think is the reality, we see only the shiny, right? Oh, everybody's doing perfect. We're all fine. Cracking smiles. We're fine. But no, actually, it's okay to peel back the onion and show a little bit more of that vulnerability, and things sometimes aren't fine. But it's the transformation story from it that I think is the powerful part.
We're all in this together, just figuring it out.
Yeah.
That's what we're all just doing the best we can with what we know at the time.
Yeah.
So, I think it's really important to get a little bit vulnerable and to let people into that real side, not the darker side, because we're a balance of light and dark. And so I think it just helps feeling less alone when you can share your story with somebody else.
100%. So you spoke a lot about gratitude, and I love, love, love that, because gratitude in my book and simplicity, they go hand in hand. So tell us, what's one thing that you've written down lately that you're super grateful for?
I'm really grateful for my relationship with my husband, actually. He is right there, just trying to match frequencies with me, and it's been really helpful in accomplishing what I have in the last year, because when I have my lows, he's bigger than one of those things on my list, and he knows how to lift me up. So I've just been very grateful for that lately.
That's great. You spoke about your superpowers earlier in the episode as well, but what's one superpower you feel like you possess, and how did you cultivate or develop that skill over time?
My superpowers are, or I just recently realized this. Last year, I wrote a letter to 11 different people I know asking what my superpower was. It was a huge catalyst to launching this podcast, but a lot of them said that I have some power to take information from tons of sources and organize it in a way for people to understand. And so that, combined with my innate honesty and vulnerability, I've always been an oversharer. I used to think it was a fault until I started reading my podcast reviews and realizing that, it's like that saying, everybody poops. Everybody has a lot of these things that we're ashamed to share.
Yeah.
And so, like I said, I just want to bring some of those stories to light and highlight a new way for people to look at things, and kind of like you, make it as simple as possible.
Yeah. So where is one social media channel that you like to hang out at most? Is it Instagram?
Yeah, Instagram. I always post little clips of my upcoming episodes and just positive inspiration for people to see as they're scrolling through their feed, a little quote. But one thing that people have been loving lately is I launched a daily email called The Morning Mind Love, and all it is it's short, tiny bits of inspiration to remind you of your own beauty, power, and worth every single day. So if you want to just go to mindlove.com and sign up for that, I've been getting so much feedback. It's actually been blowing my mind. So I think it's been really helpful for people.
That's great. Instagram, her handle is Mind Love Podcast, and we'll again put the links down in the show notes for all of that. So my final question for you today, Melissa, and thank you again for being here and sharing your story, kind of peeling back and showing us the simple stuff that we can do to change our habits and routines. And again, be a little bit of a higher vibration in life. So somebody is maybe listening to our podcast right now and they're feeling inspired. They heard the tips and tools and go, you know what, actually maybe that is possible, but they're in the muck. They're deep down in the fog and they haven't popped the bubble quite yet. What's one thing you would whisper into her ear right now that could just encourage her?
Imagine all of your most positive qualities that you're the most proud of. That's who you truly are. Everything else is just the muck that's in the way of that. It's your job to figure out how to scrape that away to get to the highest version of yourself. And don't claim anything else, because they're just not you.
Melissa Monte of Mind Love Podcast, thank you so much for being on today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a lot of fun.